All right, good morning. This is the June 24th JupyterLab meeting. 9 a.m. on Fridays.
2016.
Thank you.
So how about we can do some short status reports, and then I think one topic that was brought up for discussion is the SciPy talk and what we want to cover in it, and maybe a brief outline or at least a vision of responsibility for preparation for it.
Yeah.
And decide who's going to be presenting it, actually, because we as in Continuum needs to budget for that. So.
Okay. So let's just do short status reports first then. I've been working on widgets. I think I've finished the first draft of an overhaul of widgets to be TypeScript and to be able to use Phosphor widgets to communicate and be able to embed into the new notebook as a straight Phosphor hierarchy. What this does is it allows us to have resize events. So Sylvan's been begging for this for a long time to be able to resize SVGs based on resize events from the Phosphor hierarchy, and then reviewing a ton.
Okay.
Steve. Oh, Brian.
Hey, Jason.
Yeah.
Are you one of the people who's kind of doing the most on widgets right now?
Yeah. Right now. Yeah. Right now, I'm the one deep into the code base.
Okay, cool, thanks.
All right, I guess I'm next. Been continuing to write the unit tests for the pieces of the notebook in JupyterLab, the widgets and the actions associated with them and the models. Doing some cleanup while I'm doing that. I just finished a major PR on Jupyter.js services to clean up the API there. Darian's shaking his head because he had to review it. And so I'm just going to continue doing that, and I'm writing documentation as I go, narrative docs where appropriate in preparation for this iPod talk. That's it.
Do we have a running build of the docs now so that we can start seeing the structure of the docs kind of take shape on Read the Docs, or not yet?
We have the tutorial now on Read the Docs.
Okay.
So and what the walkthrough.
Okay. And is that hooked up? I haven't looked at the repo in the last couple of days. Is that hooked up via kind of a regular Sphinx build so that as new commits get made, it gets updated, or is it a manual build? Okay.
No, it's there, and if you look at the README of the repo, it's under the documentation section. There's the API docs that the guys have done, and then there's also that architecture tutorial that was part of the walkthrough, and that links to the read the docs, the bottom one.
Great.
I guess I'll go. So after our discussion last week about refactoring and having resettable models and stuff, I updated the cells to be able to support model changes, and finally finished all the unit tests for cells, and the editor widget as well. And now I'm doing a similar refactor to the completion widget so that it also uses the interface, the options interface and the render interface pattern that we're using everywhere else, and also working on its behavior so that it works more like the IPython completion. Yeah, that's it for me.
So this is probably worth discussing with the group, because this is a conversation that Darian and I had yesterday while he was helping me debug a weird problem that I was seeing. But it's probably worth bringing it up to see whether anyone disagrees with kind of my take on it. I summarized it in an issue, but obviously different tools have different completion behavior, whether you tab a first time and it opens up some options for completion, and whether the second tab completes or cycles through or takes action on the first item, or all of that is obviously varies subtly between VI and Emacs and Visual Studio and Sublime and TextMate and this and that. And we're never going to be able to be consistent with everybody because there are inconsistencies between tools. The one thing that I think should be our policy, because it's the only thing we can control, is to be consistent in as much as possible. And now that IPython Master, not IPython 4.2, but IPython Master uses Prompt Toolkit, the capabilities that exposes are much closer to what you get in a GUI. And so it's easier to be more consistent between, say, the web notebook or the web console and the terminal behavior. So I think our policy is that we should be, in as much as possible, very consistent between our clients, so that the completion behavior at the command line terminal client, the the Jupyter console at the terminal, is the same as the completion behavior in the web console and is the same as the completion behavior in the notebook. And I think this is important because completion is one of those things that is really, really automatic, right? It's completely driven by muscle memory. You get used to it, and if there are subtle differences between two things, it's actually easier to deal with huge differences than with subtle differences. If you have to deal with humongous differences, you sort of switch modes. If it's almost the same but it does something slightly wrong, you're going quickly and then something breaks. But if someone disagrees, we should discuss it.
Well, actually, there is one IPython behavior that I noticed today that I hadn't seen before, that I don't really think is intuitive at all. Oh man, I can't share my screen, can I? No, I think I have to install an extension first, so I'll do that.
It takes 5 seconds. It's really quick.
Okay. But basically, the automatic filling in of what Fernando yesterday described as greedy. Basically, when there's a match and it's the only match, it automatically fills in. That is totally intuitive and it makes sense to me. And also, the other thing that makes sense, might be slightly more annoying to implement, and I don't think is make or break, is if there are, say, 4 matches, but they all begin with the same substring, and you only have a subset of that matching substring, filling in the rest would also be nice.
Yeah, that's how the IPython works at the terminal, back from the days of readline, and today it continues to do that in the Prompt Toolkit implementation.
So that also seems fine. Can you see my screen now?
Yep.
Okay, great. So
can you crank up your font size, because it's a little hard to read here.
Sure. Is this better?
Yep. Cool. Thanks.
Okay. So the behavior that I find weird is this sort of completion. So I'm going to type from IPyWidgets, and I'm typing all these. Now I'm going to hit tab. Okay, so it filled out the word import and then also gave me the dropdown. I think that completion ought to end at words, and I think in order to get this dropdown, that should have been another completion and not after hitting the tab just once. I think it's good that it filled out the word import, but I don't think it's good that it opened up this drop down here.
Yeah, actually, that one I don't know.
New in the Prompt Toolkit stuff. It could just be a bug.
I think that's new, actually, Darian.
Yeah,
so
I just tested with 4.2 and it doesn't do that.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
It's probably just it might be Prompt Toolkit's behavior choice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the completion behavior is really the choices of Prompt Toolkit, but open an issue on IPython marked for 5.0 and it could just be a bug.
Okay. Cool. I even have a GIF of it already, so great.
Yeah, I think it's you can argue that it's sort of consistent in the sense that it's being greedy that within import, the only thing you can do is complete on imports. But I sort of agree with you that at that point, getting the list of everything you could possibly import at that point is kind of silly. And it actually is going to cost a round trip to the kernel and that actually can cost a round trip to the file system the first time, which if you're on a spinning hard drive is actually going to take a while. So I completely agree with you. It's much better to let the person at least type the first few letters. And then that way you can filter it down to a smaller list rather than show me every one of the 2,000 packages I could possibly import. So I agree with you, and I think that's new. So, or Min confirmed that's new rather. So yeah.
Okay, cool. So far, that was
the trick is that the prompt toolkit stuff is new enough that we're trying to make it match as much as possible how it used to work, and we've hammered on a bunch of weird little inconsistencies in the last few weeks, but it is new, so it's possible that it diverges still a little bit, and it hasn't been released. So when in doubt, it's worth checking. If you find something really that feels odd like this, double check by switching your checkout to 4.2.0. There's tags for the releases, so if you're running from IPython master, you can just check out the 4.2.0 tag and double check. Because that's the one that was released, that is sort of official, and that should be the base reference for questions like this.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I've always got a conda env called stable.
Yeah,
it's just kind of the current version of everything.
That's the same way to do it.
Cool.
So for reference, 4.2 completes the import and then leaves you hanging, and then you press tab again, and then it gives you the list of things to import.
Yeah,
so
which I think is what Darren is asking for.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what Darren is asking for, and that seems totally reasonable to me.
Okay. Well, if that's the case in 4.2, then this is, I guess, probably introduced by some newer version of Prompt Toolkit or some new code that's been added. But basically, it sounds like
Prompt Toolkit
the entirety
in master. Yeah. 4.2 did not have Prompt Toolkit at all. It was purely readline based.
Oh, okay, I got it.
Yeah, so the whole thing's been rewritten. So there are plenty of chances for there to be changes in behavior that are just artifacts of the underlying tool having different behavior, and then there's also plenty of chances for there's being bugs.
Okay.
So
cool. I'll follow.
Open issues.
Great. Thanks.
But are there otherwise? So we agree on this one. Are there otherwise objections to kind of the principle that we should strive within reason for consistency between our tools rather than attempting consistency with random, like we're going to be consistent with Sublime, or we're going to be consistent with TextMate, or we're going to be consistent with VI, because I don't think that policy is a viable or sustainable one, whereas we can say we'll try to be consistent among our various interfaces. Does anyone disagree with that?
I think it'll be, there'll be a kind of a gray area for consistency between a web thing and Prompt Toolkit.
Yeah,
we've certainly got more freedom in Prompt Toolkit than readline, but I think it might be a little fuzzy, especially with even in the web context. You know, there's arguably a different arguably different things might make sense in a document type situation and a console type situation, even both in the web view.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. And don't forget, we have a terminal, so somebody can fire up the terminal, start IPython, and have the prompt toolkit.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there will be some fuzziness in terms of like complete as you type, and you know, there are some of those things that you might want in some cases and not in others, and it's less the UI, like the fact that it's on the web or not, and more the fact that it's you're editing a file versus writing in a console.
A different type of interaction.
That makes the...
Yeah, so when you're in a console, it's a lot like being in a terminal session. You're already used to using tabs, and tab completion makes total sense. But when you're in a document, like in an IDE, you don't normally do tab completion to bring up the menu. The menu just automatically happens in most IDEs. So that already is, I mean, in Visual Studio and in Sublime, as I'm typing, stuff pops up.
It depends on your setting, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess I'm talking about defaults then at that point.
Right.
It's pretty common
Whereas,
in IDEs, especially.
yeah. Whereas, like in a console setting, I totally expect to first hit tab before something like that happens. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's definitely I think a really good case to be made for consistency across different Jupyter properties, even, but not sort of in an ideological way. It might turn out to be the case that the sensible default in notebooks turns out to be actually show it by default and not have to hit tab first. It might turn out that people want that. I don't know.
Yeah, I think in general, starting with consistency as the default, and then at least have a reason to diverge.
Exactly. That's what I'm arguing.
Doesn't mean there isn't a reason. Yeah, I think that's
what I'm arguing for. Not as their input, not kind of to be ideologically stuck on it, but at least when we diverge, we have a reason for it. And eventually, we may find that a few of these things are really down to so much individual taste that we want to make them configurable. But before we get there, at least on our choice of defaults, that I think that should be the policy. Okay, good. Because at least it tells us that if we find gratuitous divergence, we should decide whether we want it, and if not, we fix it.
Does that give you enough, Darian, that you can move forward with things?
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you, folks.
Yeah. Chris, do you want to say a few words?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much of an update. I've been taking most of the week off, and we'll continue to do so today after this meeting. I guess state of Phosphor, running up into basically doing the last widget now, which is doc panel, which is the last outstanding thing. Once I get that out, then I'll cut like a 0.8 or 0.9 release or whatever, and we can start moving the stuff in JupyterLab over on the new stuff. Test suite is now reasonably complete for everything that exists in Phosphor, so that's a very good way getting us to 1.0 ready once we move over to JupyterLab. Yeah, very short update for me.
I have a quick question about that. One thing that became a big issue in IPyWidgets moving over to using Phosphor is being able to create widgets with DOM elements that I've created, being able to pass in a DOM element. That's possible with the new Phosphor?
Yeah, that's actually the only way to create a widget. Well, not the only way to create a widget. Now, basically one of the things that we did recently is got rid of all the static methods, all the static creation methods, and now they're taken in as so widget now, like the primary way to set a custom node on a widget is to pass it in to the constructor. Yeah. Otherwise, you just get a default div. So.
Perfect. Okay, we can't wait to move to that version of Phosphor with the widgets either, with the IPyWidgets. So Brian's not here. I think he should be. Oh, Fernando. Sorry.
Speaking of IPyWidgets, I keep hitting in, like yesterday when Darian and I were trying to debug this stuff. I tried to run again some IPyWidgets code, and I got again one of those red warnings about JavaScript installation issues. Is something in flux with that on master?
What are you running? You're running JupyterLab master?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So JupyterLab master is requiring basically IPyWidgets master. Mm-hmm. So yeah, there's something in flux there. Pretty soon, we're completely rewriting IPyWidgets. Rewriting is in moving everything to TypeScript and taking the opportunity to refactor and revamp some of the code while we're at it.
I also have IPyWidgets master. So should it run or not?
It depends on what master you're dealing with. Probably. Yeah, it depends on what master you're dealing with. There's things in flux right now. Yeah, there's things in flux right now. I'm not sure exactly where the masters. I'm running on my own branch, which has a lot of different versions. Okay. So it might be that some things in flux right now. But hopefully early next week we'll merge and sort of get things set stable and set again.
Okay, then I'll check. I'll try again next week, and if next week it's not working, then we'll dig into it. But I won't bug you with this for the next few days. Okay.
Thanks. Is there anything else that people wanted to discuss to unblock them or get the work to move forward?
Since the
Hey,
talk is
Jason.
only a few of you. Oh, go ahead, Carol.
I just had one thing. If you guys could put together some bullet points on actually making a new plugin, or how JupyterLab, it doesn't have to be fancy because I can fill in the rest, but this way I have something for the interns.
Okay. So there's
pretty much just like, okay, if I wanted to build like one of the examples from scratch, what are the steps that I need to do? And then what are the steps to building, like if I wanted to take JupyterLab and add a plugin, how do I do that?
okay. Right now, we only support plugins that are part of the repo, essentially. We don't support plugins that you load dynamically. So the example that's in the notebook.md, copy this stuff into this file, add this one line in this other file, and then things should work. I think might be what you're looking for. It's a plugin that will add a button to the toolbar.
Okay, I will take a look at that. I think it's more the examples directory was throwing me off because it looks like there's 4 examples in there. Is it only one? It's only one.
No, there's 4 examples in the examples directory, and those are separate from JupyterLab. They embed different components from the JupyterLab repo themselves onto pages. And then there's one example, that the JupyterLab example, that actually spins up an application.
So in the examples repo, lab spins up the JupyterLab application. Is that correct?
So let me take a look at the directories just to make sure. Yeah, so in the examples directory, there's the console, file browser, lab, notebook, and terminal directories. So the console, file browser, notebook, and terminal directories are embedding single components from the JupyterLab repo into pages. So they're not setting up a whole application. They're just embedding a single component and wiring it up.
Like a new button or something.
So they're totally separate from JupyterLab. This is how to use the components outside of JupyterLab. So the console is how to use a console, the console part of JupyterLab outside of JupyterLab. File browser is how to use the file browser part of JupyterLab outside of JupyterLab on a single standalone page.
Yeah, maybe the lab directory should be renamed. That's more like it's an alternate IDE based on the components in JupyterLab. You could see it as that.
Essentially what lab is what we're embedding into the server as a server extension. I mean, we've moved a little bit beyond it now, but lab is essentially a standalone JupyterLab. Whereas JupyterLab, the server extension, has a little bit of Python bits to serve that up from the Jupyter Notebook server.
Okay, we can take this offline, but this is still really confusing to me as to what they are.
Okay.
So we should resolve that before SciPy.
Yeah. Yep. I agree. Okay. So yeah, why don't we have a conversation later this afternoon or something, and we could clear up the confusion and then write up what it is so that nobody else is confused.
Yeah, I'll take a look at it and I'll write up what I think it is, and then we can kind of iterate off of that. Okay.
Great idea.
Okay,
Great idea.
Carol.
Thanks, Carol.
So anything else that needs to be discussed before the SciPy talk?
Yeah, I was actually wondering what, with Brian, since the talk is going to be only a few of you folks presenting, and Brian is not here, whether the working on the outline and whatnot is something that you may want to do later elsewhere.
I think we should definitely iterate elsewhere, but it would be good to get some ideas from people here.
Okay.
And then we'll pull Brian in on a later conversation. And then I think we'll decide the logistics of who presents and what parts people are presenting. It's only a 30-minute talk. I thought it was a lot longer than that, actually. 30-minute talk Thursday night. And in our abstract, we said that we're going to demonstrate the JupyterLab interface, its code base, and describe how it fits within the overall roadmap of the project. So one question is, Brian's giving a keynote. How much is this going to overlap with his keynote? But that's obviously not a question we can answer here. But
yeah, I have no idea what he's going to talk about.
So, with 30 minutes, ideas about what you would like to see, especially like Men and Fernando, because maybe you guys are some of the target here, the advanced developers that want to get into JupyterLab. Or at least it's easier for you to step in those shoes.
Yeah, I would probably think more technical. So I don't think Brian's going to get into technical details. Like he's going to say, hey, look at this cool thing. It's got slidey stuff. But things like actually discussing how, like what the panels and widgets are and what that enables me to build with it. Did Jason go away?
Jason.
Maybe not. I'm still listening, man.
Okay.
We just lost Jason. He tends to have crashy tabs on his browser. It's happened.
I have the same thing. It seems to be if I have Blue Jeans and Getter open for long enough, which I do right now, it crashes both of those tabs.
Oh, nice.
And only those two tabs.
Interesting.
But yeah, I think some technical stuff about how it works and how, because part of the point of this stuff is that it's structured in a way that makes it easier to build new things or add things. And so structuring the discussion of, this is how it works, this is how these pieces actually talk to each other, and these are the areas of the APIs and stuff where you can build something that uses this and adds a new thing.
And
so maybe a big part.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jason.
Maybe a big part will be, with only 30 minutes, we can't go too deep, but maybe a big part will be, here's a taste or a general overview, and come join us on the sprints, and we'll go much deeper, because this will be Thursday night. Come ask us questions on Friday or join us for the sprints on Saturday.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
we can go a lot deeper.
And one thing that I would start by sort of saying that, in a sense, right off the bat, from the user perspective, we're not doing anything sort of that is radically different, but rather this is a refinement of something that we had already been growing towards. So today we call it Jupyter Notebook, but in reality, it's already JupyterLab because it already has a notebook and a file manager and a terminal and a text editor, right? And then a Qt console that you can call up from within it. It's just that it only runs if you're local because it's a Qt application, but those ideas were already there. What we're saying is now we want to give you a way of using those ideas in a way that they can interoperate. So putting them on the page together and saying, like that screenshot that I put on the mailing list a couple days ago, it's like, here's the notebook, and here's the console, and here's the terminal, and here's the text editor, and here's the file manager. And now these things were thought as pieces that were meant to talk to each other. So that now the architecture of all of these are, as I love Darian's expression, they're Jupyter properties, right? All of them. And they build upon the ideas of the project, which is the protocol, the communication machinery, right? The common underlying infrastructure. And the APIs now are explicitly designed and thought for that to be possible, so that other things of this nature. So there's a path between the functionality that people have today, but it kind of accreted in a rather haphazard way. The UI doesn't let you organize it very well. The underlying APIs can't really talk to each other, but they're there. Now are brought cleanly in an extensible way that then opens the door for lots of new ideas. And so from there you can describe what are some technical pieces, how do things communicate? There's a messaging protocol, there's ways for things to talk to each other, there's ways for things to register themselves, etc., without obviously doing an hour-long developer talk, and then giving hints of not just what's out of the box there, but what are some of the things that then become possible. You could put things like this. We can now imagine widgets that control a display panel on the side. We can now easily build other kinds of environments and systems, and they're all coherent and they're all accessible through the same interface. When you log into a remotely hosted lab instance via Jupyter Hub, you get all of that in a coherent location. So it's drawing a continuous path between functionality that people know, what we understood about how we should generalize, what the architecture of the project in terms of kernels and protocols and messaging and document format supports, and what that then opens up for people in the future, for us to give to people and for other people to build upon in terms of an API that was designed for extensibility, for community development, for new tools to be put on top of it. Does that seem like the kind of like, I'm thinking of the story arc of that 30-minute talk.
Yeah, and I like that. I'm trying to capture a lot of it on HackPad. That's a good way to, instead of saying, "Oh, we messed up and we're reinventing ourselves and this is something new," instead say, "This is a fruition of the ideas that have been we've been iterating on for the last 10, 15 years." Yeah. No, and build a platform where we can move forward. Yeah. That's a great way to put it.
There's a conceptual continuity, and there's even functional continuity. It's just that today those pieces are scattered and they don't really fit very well. They're an awkward fit, and now they fit more. And you can even demonstrate how cleanly they fit by showing they're on the same page, and you can manage them. I mean, it's not hypothetical; it's real.
Right. That's a great.
I could also. Sorry, Jason. I could also see people asking the question, "How does this fit relative to the dashboard stuff?"
And my argument would be that it's precisely the kind of environment where things like dashboards can then be displayed much more easily and much more cleanly, right? The dashboards build upon the notebook already, and they present yet another view. So having a common architecture for viewing those things precisely makes those things a more natural fit. Dashboards are one obvious continuation path, richer debuggers, visual output display panels for document-oriented workflows that are non-notebook workflows where you have text documents attached to kernels and their display outputs are put elsewhere. All those things then become sort of, this is a natural home for ideas like that.
Right. Yes, I guess I'm talking about the specific project that is called dashboards. In the incubator.
I think IBM could speak to that better than we could.
The last I talked to them about it, they were happy to move over to the new stuff as soon as we kind of bless it and say, okay, it's stable enough to start building on.
Not going to slide out from under you too soon.
But I think you're right that that's a question that will come up, so we should be prepared to answer it. Or at least know where to point people. Yeah.
Another question. Carol is totally right in asking it, and the way I think about it is that dashboards are effectively another view of the notebook of the underlying architecture. This and they've worked very hard to make that possible within the current system and APIs that we have. These are APIs that make such custom views ideally will be cleaner and easier to build. So this should. And that will actually be a good litmus test, right? Will it really be easier and cleaner rather than some of the slightly awkward contortions that Peter and Gino and their team have had to apply to that code? But I think it's a very good point. Thanks, Carol. Yeah.
I want to bring up one other point that might come up is how to enable a third-party extension. For example, MB Grader. Will you be able to just pip install that, or would you also need to have NPM available? Now, we don't have a good story yet on how to add things without actually webpacking a bundle, because we've seen on Notebook Master that Require.js and Webpack do not get along. You can force feed explicitly parts of them to each other, but they don't just they don't go willingly. So this is a problem for things like BQplot that rely on Require.js to get content on the page, that we should have a policy and a plan for how to handle these things and whether we need to require NPM as part of the extension process.
And I think it's okay to say that a few of these things are still in flux, but sort of acknowledging where the problems are and inviting people to say, if this is something you care about, come and talk to us tomorrow or during the sprints and help us hammer these points before we make the wrong decision. So I think it's perfectly okay to say that on some of these kind of more deep, long-term infrastructure building questions, we haven't figured out all the answers. That's okay. This is still new. We're labeling it very explicitly as pre-alpha, so that's okay. And it should be instead an invitation for people to engage and participate.
I was going to say, even IPy widgets, I mean, we're walking back right now to hard coding the IPy widgets version, which is what, Fernando, you're seeing. As soon as we can dynamically load IPy widgets, we'll pull it out of JupyterLab and not depend on it. Yeah, so that sets up a conversation for the dev conversations over the next week or two, is starting to think about that architecture. So we maybe even have a proposal for how that can work before SciPy. Because you're right, that's going to be the first thing people are going to ask is, how do I integrate this with my own stuff without having to contribute to the repo and have it hard-coded, et cetera.
Now, I think one question that is a variant on what Steve just said is the bigger question of what is the migration path for extensions and what is going to be the story for that. We discussed it fairly extensively at the dev meeting. I think you should have a very crisp, short version of that story for people, because the number of extensions out in the wild for the existing system is larger than probably any of us would have wanted it to become, but it's the price of a system that has become popular and widely used. And many of those people may get jitters all of a sudden when they see this and they say, well, whoa, wait a minute, what am I going to do with all of my stuff, right? And what are my users going to do with it, et cetera? And my downstream community or my clients, or maybe people from industry there who have extensions we've never heard about because they may be deployed only in-house. And so having a crisp version of that answer that gives people a path will be really important. That question will come up whether during the actual Q&A or immediately after in the hallway. It will come up.
Right.
I think we might be able to get at both of the problems of needing to run Webpack again, and also kind of how do you extend stuff if we take a more conservative, like clearly defined extension points approach. So they don't necessarily need to load all those modules. You say, you hook up to an event, and we use standard hooks and events type stuff for extensions, rather than what we did with the previous approach, which was it's a page. You can do literally whatever you want with everything, and that's where a lot of the problems come from. Is that we have no way of knowing what people are doing because they can do literally anything. And so
and they can still do literally anything. It's just we never provided a very clear entry point and extension mechanism. So there was no way for them to follow, good use guidelines. There was no supported system.
Yeah, so I think if we work toward something where we define more clearly what extensions can do, and we look at existing extensions to kind of figure out what points those are, then you don't necessarily need the extensions to have access to as much as they tend to.
So part of the underlying idea of the entire platform is that everything that you're seeing is an extension, and so your extension is first class citizen right along with the file browser and the notebook and the terminal, and so in some sense our extension point and extension mechanism is baked into the platform, and that's what we're using to build the entire application. There's extension points for things like the document manager. So there's several different extension points that we have, but it's already baked into the platform. That's how the platform runs. Everything is a plugin and extension.
One thing that might be worth exploring is Sylvan had done the widget cookie cutter stuff, and that seemed to have worked worked pretty well. Maybe it's something, if we could do something like that with an extension and give people like, this is what you need to be able to support in order to be a valid extension. It sort of gets at Min's conservative, but it also kind of gives people some direction as opposed to, well, we don't know how you're going to get there from here.
I think in particular I think that is a good note, and I think for this, in particular for the conservative, these are the extension points. I think part of what I'm thinking about with that is extensions that don't need, that you can load at runtime with require whatever the new dynamic loading tool will be next week. That don't need to be built into the application with Webpack. That maybe a certain class of things does, but it certainly shouldn't be everything. And maybe you draw this line of here's where you've just got a bit of JavaScript. It wants to, do something on save. It wants to, just handle some events and modify something. That's clearly defined and can be loaded at runtime and just talks through, the standard JavaScript event APIs or whatever.
Loading extensions dynamically is what we don't have a story for yet.
Yeah, and dynamically can be.
But to be clear, that's baked into the framework for supporting because extensions are all activated based on promises. So you can have an extension that dynamically loads your code.
The underlying capabilities
it's just
there. We haven't brought it to the user yet.
Yeah, as long as they don't rely on because we have an issue right now. A lot of the issues on the vanilla, on the Notebook Classic, have to do with extension points involve modifying, basically Python style stuff where you're setting attributes on a class or something, and that doesn't work because the dynamically loaded class object is not the original one. But if extensions didn't work that way, you still get it, the dynamically loaded class is still correct. So if you were reading some property there and then calling, registering event handlers on instances on the page, then these things wouldn't have come up in the way that they are. So I think the way you express the integrations can prevent that kind of thing from being a problem. At least at the same problem, you can get new problems. But.
Yeah, let's iterate on this over the next week. I agree. That's something that we'll have to address. How do people load third-party extensions?
And I don't know, Jason, I don't know the code base well enough to know whether this is viable or not, but I'm wondering if it might be possible. And I understand that there's at the bottom, there's the everything is an extension issue, that everything has been designed in a very agnostic way. So in principle, there's kind of no distinction between what very core pieces, like say the file manager or the main things like the notebook itself have to do versus whatever random code a user provided as an extension could do. But that's the technical reality, but there could be a policy distinction where we say the system is still evolving, and until we know what the stability and the cleanliness of that entire system is going to look like, this is the part that is designated as sort of extension safe, and that is considered public. And yes, technically, it's true that they're all on equal grounds and there's no intrinsic barrier that prevents you from doing that, but it's a policy and documentation one where we say, these are the ones where right now we think it's safe, and we're willing to honor these APIs as public and these mechanisms to load code and do these extensions. If you cross over here, yes, it can work because that's how the system works, but we reserve the right to break that, and if we figure that we need to update that part of the system, and the burden will be on you, which is different from what we've had up until now, where since nothing was documented, everything was fair game, and we're in the situation that Min was describing. So I don't know how vital what I just said is, but I think it's worth at least thinking about. And if you find corners that are sandboxed enough for that to be good protection, and yet useful enough for people to do something, because obviously if the sandbox is useless, people will just ignore it and they'll go digging into the rest. But at least keep that in mind as a possibility, because it might be something. And then as things stabilize in that design and they solidify, we may move that boundary further and further out.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything by the time of SciPy that we'll want to guarantee is API stable. I mean, I think we'll be very explicit. This is alpha. Things can still change. Here's how it works today. The underlying extension mechanism works the same, but the point is each plugin, each extension offers things to the environment. And so in a sense, each extension has its own interface for how to extend it or how to interact with it. I don't know, what's your feel, Steve or Chris or Darian? Are there parts of are there plugins that you feel are going to be API stable in 2 weeks? Yeah, nobody's committing to anything.
I think pre-alpha calling anything stable is lying to yourself.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So I think at this point,
literally refactored everything last week, and we didn't think we were going to do that 2 weeks ago. So,
yeah, that's my take too. Chris, you unmuted.
Yeah, I mean, I think 2 weeks right now is.
This is the rest of a subset of the Jupyter team. This is Stacy Dorton here at BIDS. Some of you have met her before, not all of you.
I was like, this is nice.
Thank you, Stacy.
I'm not going to make any promises. What I can tell you is that the stuff that's in Phosphor Master right now, I don't anticipate changing in any substantial ways. I'm pretty happy with how most things are there at this point in time. So, but yeah, I can neither confirm nor deny the.
Yeah, I think we could probably call Phosphor and Phosphide as stable things to play with, but what the components we built on top of that as pre-alpha still. Mm-hmm. Okay, so thanks a lot for the feedback. We've got just a few minutes before the hour, so thanks a lot for the feedback. I think that was really helpful and useful for us to have things to think about as we work on this talk, and we'll get together with Brian some other time in the next week to sort of iterate more on what the talk should look like and stuff.
Good.
So anything
a couple
else?
Things. Yeah, well, a couple kind of things on lab itself. Can I ask a couple questions?
Sure.
Do we have any way of knowing what's running so that and recovering things that are running? Say I have a lab session and I have a notebook and a console and a whatever, and my browser crashes, right? If I hit the lab URL again, I get an empty lab page, a starting empty lab page. With the old notebook, I could go to the running tab and I see I have these things open and I can basically get to them again. Do we have that yet? I haven't found it, and if we don't, I think we need it. Was that on your radar already or not? Okay.
Steve, it looks like you were.
Where do you guesstimate that capability? Is it something that is easy, or is it one of those things that is going to require a lot? Because I'm kind of beginning to think of coarse feature parity in the sense of beginning to be really usable, and I see pieces getting there, but I still see a few. In my mind, this is one of those really key things that is sort of make or break for real world usage.
Well, I think you were talking like a sidebar item that emulates the existing running tab in the classic notebook. That's pretty straightforward to just throw that on the page right now and then iterate on it, if that's something we're lacking and needing short term.
But keeping your document, pulling back up your documents arranged to how you had them, opening them back up and everything, I think right now, one, we don't have a way of getting that state easily, and two, the question is, where do we store that state? I mean, before it was stored in the browser URL, but now the question is, how are we going to store settings? How are we going to store that kind of state? We could store it in the local storage of your browser. We run into issues with that with IPyWidgets, where a lot of times you actually don't want to store it in the local state of the browser. We could make lab have a session URL, and if you hit that one session URL, it pulls that state out of the browser. Anyway, there's a lot of questions about where that state should be stored and then pulled back out that are unanswered at this point.
Okay.
I interpret this tab as just the list of running sessions and the ability to click on it and open the notebook associated with that session. Is that what you're asking for? Am I interpreting that correctly?
That's what we had right now. I mean, right now, because we don't have a concept of a complete session at the UI level in the old notebook, you could see the list of running notebooks and the list of running terminals. I think what Jason is getting to is actually the concept of a session ID that would contain potentially even, I have these two consoles and this one terminal and these three notebooks open in this session, and give me a way of accessing that. But this discussion has many ramifications, so I don't think we're going to make any decision now. I just wanted to flag that I think this is one of those pretty high priority ones. The other, an even simpler question though, is there a way to, I couldn't find a way to rename a file open with the editor? Because right now, is there?
There is in the file browser, and it will update the tab when you change the name in the file browser.
Okay, so not super obvious, but
yeah, double clicking on a tab title to edit the title will be future. Okay. Something like that. Having editable tab titles for rename.
And we do have an issue in FOSS4 to extract that.
Yeah, so since everything starts untitled.txt, I was sort of stuck like, okay, how do I rename this thing to? I ended up renaming it as a terminal, it makes the editor a little weird to use. I'm thinking kind of the baseline functionality for us to start advertising to people. Hey, play with this. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're done, Jamie.
Hey.